Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Nick Bolto, and this is Nathan Brown,
Hey.
the author of the brand new book, Advent. So Nathan, the Reverend Tim Costello loves it.
He's a generous man.
And I love it. I appreciate how you've broken it into 31 bite-sized pieces, so it's a very digestible book for the very busy month of December.
That's it.
Tell us a bit about your motive for writing this book.
Yeah, I mean, I am one of those people that traditionally, and when I started talking about this project with my wife, she laughed at me because I tend to be relatively curmudgeonly about Christmas, and that, you know, all the humbug in the shops and all the carry-on and everything everybody gets stressed about. But then every year when you get to the time when you stop and you retell the story and you sing those songs and you sit with your family and you know, something happens at that moment. And this book was to try and stretch that moment over the whole month, because that's the part of the festival, the season of Christmas that actually matters. It's a privilege that I've had actually 3 times in the last decade to spend time in Israel, Jordan, the Palestinian territories, and one of the highlights is always Bethlehem, which is a fascinating thing because there's actually not much to see there. It's just a very ordinary town. And I think that's part of the virtue of it. That's part of the significance, is that, you know, partly because of all the tourists, but, you know, Bethlehem is a town with a KFC.
Right.
You know, so it's you know, it was a particular time and place, but part of the whole miracle of the incarnation is that God came to an ordinary place.
Yeah.
And on the edge of Bethlehem, and there's a chapter in the book where I reflect on that a little bit, there's a place called the Shepherd's Field. And in previous visits there, I've had the opportunity to see shepherds with their sheep and doing what they've done there for thousands of years. And it just gives an extra sense of reality to the story, that this, you know, the subtitle of the book talks about the good news. One of the things with the news aspect of that is this is something that happened in a particular time and place. And there's so many, you know, you can spend time digging up the history of it and some of those kind of things. But even when you say 2020, we say, well, you know, 2,000 odd years ago, something happened that changed history.
Yeah. The Christmas story, you've touched on aspects that have just become so hollow, but why do you think it still matters? Why is Christmas worth reading about?
Well, I wrote a whole book to answer that question, really, because we say good news, so it's news, it's something that happened historically in a time and place. What makes it good? And that was kind of my task that I set myself. Here's all the reasons why it's good. And it really is something that has transformed history. It's the most influential moment in history. And I quote J.R.R. Tolkien, author of Lord of the Rings, and he was a Oxford professor who had the idea of, you know, when he was writing his massive stories, he came up with this term called eucatastrophe, which is a catastrophe that is good. So a catastrophe changes everything. A eucatastrophe is an event that changes everything for the good. And I have borrowed that term in this book a couple of times to point to, you know, if you take the Bible story seriously of what Jesus was about, who he was, what he came to do, and what he's promised in the rest of the story, that is the ultimate eucatastrophe of human history.
Fantastic. And with so much about Christmas and of Christmas, what is it that you're hopeful your readers will take from your book?
Simply to appreciate the story again in a new way. Whether you've never heard it before and you kind of just get to Christmas and go, well, that's all a bit odd, but it's a good excuse to get together and eat some good food and all those things. Yeah, that's good, but there's more to it. And if you've grown up with the story and every Christmas you pause and sing those songs and retell the story, I think there's more to discover yet. And I was, you know, just in the focused thinking that I had to put into writing this book, I found it just a really uplifting and positive experience to go back into the actual stories in Matthew chapter 1 and 2 and Luke chapter 1 and 2. This is what these people, who most of them didn't really know what was happening at the time, you know, it was always a shock to them, it was always unsettling, it was always, you know, they were an oppressed people in a very difficult and hard time to be alive. But suddenly they realised that something different was happening in the world, and that this baby, as unlikely and as almost as absurd as the idea seems to be, somehow changed everything. And that their lives, the history of this world even, would be different because of it. And I hope that people can just get a little bit of a new, bigger sense of that from reading this book.